The Ardennes always felt like a place that swallowed sound, but that morning, December 16, 1944, it felt as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I remember rubbing the frost off my sleeves while watching the boys of my 394th INR platoon shuffle around our outpost, teasing each other, warming their hands over a battered tin stove. Their laughter drifted between the pines, thin and fragile in the cold air. Down on the road, the engines of a couple of jeeps murmured steadily, exhaust rising like pale ghosts into the early light. I was 20 years old, too young for the responsibility, too old to pretend I wasn't scared, and I kept looking down at my map, drawing and redrawing those same firing sectors with a stub of a pencil. Routine. That's all it felt like. Just another frozen dawn on what everyone called a quiet front. A place where nothing important ever happened. But something felt wrong. At first, I thought it was just the snowfall, thick, soft flakes drifting down with almost unnatural silence. Then I noticed how still the trees had become. No wind. No distant chatter. No birds. Just a kind of waiting. That's when I heard it. A low vibration, barely more than a tremor in the earth, like some heavy engine throttling up far beyond the tree line. Not one of ours. Not a jeep, not a half-track. Something deeper. Hungrier. I stood up from the map, heart pushing against my ribs, and stared into the white haze ahead. For a moment I thought I imagined it, but then I saw a shape shift behind the curtain of falling snow. Too big to be a scout patrol. Too slow to be a stray civilian. A shadow. Then another. I felt the cold crawl up my spine. Something was moving toward us. And whatever it was, I knew, before any of my men felt it, before anyone in headquarters even suspected it, that our quiet little corner of the Ardennes was about to erupt. That history itself had just turned its gaze toward 18 young men on a lonely ridge. We all believed the Ardennes was the safest place on the Western Front. That was the joke whispered in the foxholes. If you needed a breather, you got sent to our sector. I remember thinking the same as I looked over the forest that morning. Thin snow, quiet slopes, nothing but the occasional patrol moving along the logging roads. It felt like a place forgotten by the war. Only later did I learn how wrong we were. While we cleaned rifles and shook frost from our boots, the Germans were gathering far beyond those trees. An entire offensive, an all-or-nothing gamble they called Wacht dem Rhein. They wanted to smash through our lines, seize Antwerp, split the Allied armies in two, and somehow force a negotiated peace. A final resurrection of a dying empire. But none of that was in my mind then. All I knew was that my reconnaissance platoon, just 18 men, had been sent to watch a sector that headquarters dismissed as low risk. We didn't have heavy weapons, no artillery support, not even nearby infantry companies to fall back on. Our job was to observe, report, and stay out of trouble. The world beyond our little ridge was supposed to be quiet. It wasn't. While we stood there unaware, nearly 300 German paratroopers of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division were already threading through the woods toward us. Another 200 followed them. And behind those men, further back in the shadows, the armor of the 1st SS Panzer Division, battle-hardened, confident, ruthless, rumbled forward like steel giants waking from a long sleep. None of this had been communicated to us. Not a whisper. Intelligence saw nothing unusual. Command believed the German army was exhausted, collapsing, incapable of mounting a large attack. That belief would cost lives before the day was done. Sometimes I think about the strange symmetry of it all. They believed we were weak, demoralized boys scattered along the frontier. We believed they had nothing left to strike with. Two sides staring across a frozen forest, both convinced the other was too broken to fight. We were all wrong. On that morning, time, fate, and the cold breath of the Ardennes conspired to bring two mismatched forces together on this forgotten ridge. 18 of us. Thousands of them. And yet, somehow, everything, the north flank, the pace of the German advance, perhaps even the outcome of the offensive, was about to hinge on what we did in the next 20 hours. That we moved through the motions the way any reconnaissance unit would. Even after that strange rumble in the forest, I forced myself to stay calm, to keep the men focused on the manual. We checked the old foxholes, knocking ice from the rims and reinforcing the weakest spots with logs. The Jeep-mounted .50 was positioned to cover the clearing below, its barrel already frosting in the cold. I sent 2 men to extend our patrol line and told the others to keep low until visibility improved. None of it felt dramatic, just routine work on a bleak December morning. Still, the quiet bothered me. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It felt like something was watching us. I bent over my map again, marking likely approach routes, when a faint movement in the snowfield caught my eye. At first I thought it was just the wind brushing the branches. But the shapes kept growing, slow, steady, deliberate. I raised my binoculars. My breath froze. These weren't scouts. These weren't probing patrols. They were coming in too tightly, too organized, with helmets low and rifles ready. A full assault company, marching straight toward our ridge as if confident the world already belonged to them. Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers, veterans, men who didn't waste time on caution. For a second I felt the weight of it all press down on me. 18 of us. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of them. And yet the instinct was simple, clean. Hold fire, steady the line, wait for the exact moment. When the Germans dipped into the shallow gully below, I dropped my hand. The first shot cracked through the silence like glass breaking. Then another. Then the machine gun on the jeep let out its heavy, pounding roar. Snow leapt from the ground in violent bursts. German helmets snapped back. Bodies tumbled. Confusion rippled through their ranks as they dove for cover, scrambling behind stumps and rocks that gave them almost nothing. For an instant, I saw disbelief on their faces. They thought an entire American company had opened fire. Maybe even a fortified strongpoint. No 18-man platoon should have hit them that hard, that fast, that precisely. They had walked straight into what they assumed was a predictable, sleepy outpost. They were wrong. As I reloaded and shouted new sectors to my men, I felt the first crack in the illusion between us and them. They weren't facing a tired, hollow line. And we weren't facing some scattered remnants of a beaten army. This was the opening moment of something far larger. A storm neither side had been meant to meet here on this forgotten ridge. And it was only the beginning. The first German wave fell back faster than I expected. I saw men dragging the wounded through the snow, shouting to one another as they scrambled for the treeline. For a moment, the forest went still again, the kind of stillness that doesn't comfort you but warns you. I knew they'd return. And when they did, it wouldn't be in confusion. They came in harder the second time, spread wider, rifles blazing, grenades arcing through the white haze. Their officers shouted orders I could barely hear over the machine gun fire. I felt the ground shake as their boots pounded forward in unison. Still my men held steady. Every shot counted. Every burst struck where it needed to. We were hidden so well beneath the snow and brush that the Germans must have thought they were firing at ghosts. When the second attack finally broke apart, I could see their frustration spilling into the cold air like steam. But the third wave, that one felt different. It had weight. Purpose. They pushed in with a fury I hadn't felt since the worst days of the Hurtgen. Mortars thudded behind them, shells bursting against the ridge, showering us with dirt, splinters and frozen needles of pine. Their machine guns swept the hillside like scythes. The paratroopers advanced low and fast, using every fold of ground, every stump, every scrap of shadow. Our ammunition belts were growing thin. I could hear the dry snaps of near-empty clips. The Jeep's .50 had already overheated once. Its barrel smoked like the breath of some exhausted beast. Somewhere behind me the radio hissed with dead static. A mortar fragment had torn through the casing earlier, leaving us cut off from the world. That was when the pressure began to settle into my bones. I tried to move along the line, checking foxholes, counting shapes, names, faces, just to know who was still with me. Some men answered with a nod. Others gave a thumbs up without taking their eyes off their sights. A few didn't respond at all. I forced myself not to dwell on that. The Germans were adjusting. Their fire grew tighter, their movements sharper. Each time they surged forward, they came closer, 10 yards closer, then 15, then too close for comfort. They were learning us, feeling us out, turning our hidden strength into something they could read. I saw one group attempt a flanking move on our right, crawling through the brush like wolves. We cut them down, but the message was clear. They weren't giving up. The snow kept falling, thickening the air, muffling everything except the pounding of hearts and rifles. Minutes stretched into hours. My hands were numb, not from the cold but from gripping my weapon so tightly. Every breath felt like dragging ice into my lungs. And still we held. 18 men against wave after wave that should have crushed us. It didn't feel heroic. It felt impossible, desperate, unreal. As if the forest itself had narrowed into this one ridge, this one fight, and we were being ground down inch by inch. But we weren't done yet. Somewhere in the middle of that chaos, the battle stopped feeling like strategy and started feeling like survival. The forest swallowed the world beyond a few yards, turning everything into a blur of white and smoke. I remember lifting my head just enough to see Private Tannen's face, pale, eyes wide, breath shaking in short clouds as a bullet cracked past him so close it snapped a branch beside his ear. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, maybe a joke, maybe a prayer, but all he managed was a tight nod before firing again into the swirling snow. Down by the Jeep, Miller, our mechanic, quiet kid from Ohio, gripped the frozen handle of the .50 like it was the only thing keeping him alive. His gloves had iced over, stiff as bark, and I could see him flexing his fingers between bursts to keep them from going numb. Each time he squeezed the trigger, the recoil jolted through his whole body. I didn't know if he was trembling from fear or cold. Maybe both. Probably both. In the next foxhole over, Sergeant O'Donnell, the oldest among us at 29, whispered a quick prayer under his breath before tossing a grenade toward the shadows below. I heard him murmur his daughter's name, Mary, so softly I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then he steadied his rifle and fired again with the precision of a man who'd long stopped believing in luck. Behind me, Kitts the medic crawled through the snow toward a wounded man clutching his leg, blood mixing with the frost in dark spirals. Kit's face was drawn tight, teeth clenched against the cold and the fear that there might be nothing he could do. He tried anyway, hands shaking as he wrapped bandages that froze almost immediately. I heard him whisper, "Stay with me, just stay with me," though he had no morphine left and no help coming. Everywhere I looked, someone was confronting something they'd never trained for. Fear, disbelief, the creeping sense that none of this made sense. 18 men holding back what felt like an army. Between waves, the forest fell into a suffocating quiet, broken only by the panting of exhausted lungs and the faint groans of the wounded. I crawled along the line, touching shoulders, whispering encouragement I wasn't sure I believed. But the strangest part was how none of us understood why we were still alive. 3 waves, maybe more, and we were still here, still firing, still refusing to break. The Germans kept coming with a persistence that felt almost inhuman, and yet something in us held, fear sharpening into defiance, cold carving itself into resolve. This wasn't reconnaissance anymore. It wasn't a quiet front or a routine assignment or any of the lies we'd believed yesterday. It was a nightmare that had cracked open in the middle of the Ardennes, and we were trapped inside it. Each minute felt stolen, each breath borrowed, each shot a thin defiance against something that should have swallowed us long ago. And still the enemy kept coming. By late afternoon, the ridge felt less like ground and more like a thin raft floating in a sea of fire. The snow that had once softened everything was now churned black with dirt and smoke. Every movement hurt. Every breath scraped. I remember checking my pockets again and again, counting what little ammunition I had left. 3 clips, then 2, then 1. The others were running dry too. You could hear it in the rhythm of our firing. Sharp bursts at first, then single shots, then long stretches of silence as each man tried to make his last rounds count. Somewhere behind the ridge, the sun slipped away without ceremony. Night seeped through the trees, thick and merciless. I knew what darkness meant. They would flank us. They had tried in daylight and failed. But night was theirs. And when the final wave came, it came quietly, too quietly. No shouting, no boots pounding. Just the faint crunch of snow and the sudden flicker of shadows appearing far too close. I whispered for the men to hold tight. My voice barely made it past my own breath. The forest had become a maze of twisting shapes. One moment all was still, the next a burst of German gunfire erupted from our right, then from behind, then from a foxhole that should have been ours. They had slipped around us like smoke. I fired until my rifle clicked empty. The sound felt like a verdict. I dropped it and reached for a grenade, only to realize I had none left. On my left, someone was shouting, Miller maybe, before being swallowed by the night. O'Donnell swung his rifle like a club, striking at figures I couldn't see. Kitts tried to drag a wounded man back into cover, but a flare burst overhead, revealing them both before the light faded again. Then a pair of German voices barked orders right behind me. I turned, cold seizing my spine, and stared into the muzzle of a rifle. A hard voice shouted for me to stand. Another yanked my arm, forcing me down the slope. Around me, silhouettes emerged, some of my men limping, hands raised, others slumped in the snow, silent and still. I felt a bitter heaviness settle in my chest. We had fought until there was nothing left to give. By the time the Germans secured the ridge, the forest was littered with the cost of their advance. I heard their officers muttering in disbelief as they counted bodies, examined our empty foxholes, tried to reconcile the damage with the truth in front of them. 18 men. Just 18. They had lost hundreds. And they had been delayed, hours upon hours, by a force so small it should never have mattered. Yet somehow it had. As they marched us into captivity, I looked back at the ridge, a dark scar against the dim horizon. We had not won. We had not escaped. But the 1st SS Panzer Division was behind schedule, and the northern flank had just gained the time it needed to brace itself. It wasn't glory. It wasn't triumph. But it was enough. They marched us through the trees in a column of shadows, our hands numb from the cold and from the surrender none of us had ever imagined making. The forest felt strangely peaceful again, as if the violence of the day had exhausted even the wind. Now and then a German guard glanced at me with an expression I couldn't place. Confusion, maybe, or something bordering on respect. They spoke in low voices, arguing quietly about what they had just faced. I caught fragments. Amerikanisch Company? Battalion? Unmöglich. Impossible. Yes. That was the word that hung in the air. When they finally lined us up in a clearing and began questioning us one by one, I saw the moment the truth landed. An officer, tall, gaunt, still shaking from the fight, looked at our ranks, then at the casualty figures reported by his men. His eyes widened slightly, disbelief tightening his jaw. How many? He asked me in rough English. 18, I answered. For a moment, silence settled over the clearing like ash. Someone behind him muttered a curse under his breath. Someone else looked away as if the number itself embarrassed them. These men had come believing the American line was hollow, broken, ready to crumble at the first hard push. But the myth of an easy advance had died that day on our little ridge. They knew it. I saw it in their faces. As they moved us toward the rear, exhaustion sank into my bones, heavier than any fear I'd felt during the fight. My legs barely carried me through the snow. The faces of the men we'd lost kept flickering in my mind. Tannen's determined stare, Miller gripping the .50 until his knuckles went white, O'Donnell whispering his daughter's name between bursts of fire. Men who had held the line long after reason said they shouldn't. Later, after the war, people told us we'd delayed the 1st SS Panzer Division nearly 20 hours. They said generals credited our stand with buying the time needed to reinforce the northern flank, to blunt the blow that was meant to split the Allied armies apart. They called our platoon the most decorated of the war. Words that felt strange to me then and still do now. Because all I remember are the small things. The sting of cold air in my lungs, the snap of branches under German boots, the trembling breaths of the boys beside me who refused to run. And the ridge, quiet, indifferent, holding the last footprints of men who had fought beyond their strength. History would paint it clean. But I lived the raw edge of it. 18 of us standing against an army because there was nowhere to go and nothing to do but hold. Sometimes I walk along the memories like a man moving through snowdrifts, slowly, carefully, afraid of disturbing something fragile. War takes so much, burns so much, leaves so many names behind. But it also leaves warnings. Reminders carved into the silence after the guns go quiet. We fought because we had to. Others died because they believed they had no choice. And in the end, all that remained was a ridge in the Ardennes, a thin line of stubborn men, and the cold truth that even the strongest illusions can shatter in a single day.